Hi everyone, today we're going to be looking at working with developers. This is the third lecture in our series of music for video games, and hopefully today we're going to be looking at ways to really get the most out of your relationship with your clients. We're going to look at finding a common language, working out keywords that can describe the game that'll help you know what to write, and also dealing with feedback or maybe a lack of feedback. So let's get started. Okay, finding a common language. So to begin with, I'm going to assume a developer doesn't know anything about music. Each relationship with a developer is going to evolve over time. You learn more about them. You get to know, hey, maybe they do know a little bit of music stuff, or maybe they know what pitch is, or what rhythm is, or tempo. But to start with, we really need to assume they don't know anything and just try and keep things really simple. They're probably not going to know what a key is, or what a clarinet or French horn is, for example. They might know strings, they might know brass, but generally you just want to start pretty neutral with your music terminology. So you probably don't want to say things like, I'll try a minor section with oboe and strings. Like, you'll know what that means, but they won't. A game developer may or may not understand that. So instead, you might be better off saying something like, "I'll try to make this part sadder and try some different sounds." You know, use emotional words like sadder, happier, faster, slower. For example, instead of saying, "Why don't I modulate to G minor here?" you could say, "Why don't I change the feeling of the music here? Why don't I make it a little bit more melancholy?" For example. So you probably wouldn't say something like, "I'm going to use cor anglais in minor pentatonic," because they won't know what any of that stuff is. It's unlikely that a game developer is going to be classically trained or have a intimate knowledge of scales and different orchestral instruments. So instead you could say something like, "I want to try something dark, reedy, and bluesy," you know. So try to keep things neutral to start with, and over time you'll work out what kind of terms they're used to, what they know, and you may end up teaching them as well. Like, hey, this is a cor anglais, this is what it sounds like. It has a dark sound and register. So don't be afraid to show them things as well if they show interest. So you might see that they actually do know some musical stuff. Generally it's a good idea to let them lead. They may know some terms, but it doesn't mean they know everything. If they say, if they do know what a clarinet sounds like, it doesn't mean they suddenly know all about voice leading and counterpoint. So just let them lead and kind of take note of what things they do know, and you can build on that in future. Definitely give them more detail if they ask for it. I always happily tell them what kind of instruments I'm using. You can link videos and show them. They always enjoy learning, they're just like us. They like to learn about new instruments and new things. So you can show them videos of a toggle harper or some strange gamelan instrument, and they'll be very interested. They usually like to see these things. And sometimes you can send them entire videos of pieces and say, hey, what do you think of this, or which parts do you like? It's good to find a kind of reference point like that. It's good to foster their musical knowledge if you can, but don't overwhelm them with theory. So don't dive into four-part counterpoint or the intricacies of orchestration. And the more you talk to them, the more you're going to learn about them and their understanding of music. And of course, we're going to kind of tailor our communication approach for each developer. Some of them may have played in bands. They know, they may know metal music, or they may know jazz. They might know jazz chords or something like that. So each time you work with a developer, you're going to learn different things about them, and each one is individual. So you're going to have probably an individual approach over time. You start off very neutral, and as you move on, you'll work out what things they understand and where you can introduce more detail in how you talk about the music. Alright, communication is absolutely vital when you're writing music for any project. In order for us to write an effective soundtrack, we do need to know 4 things, which is our setting, aesthetic, pacing, and the theme and story of the game. We did cover this last lecture. The setting would be like the period or the world that the game is set in. The aesthetic is what the game looks like. Is it 16-bit? Is it hyper-realistic, made on the Unreal Engine or whatever? or is it like a hand-drawn, cel-shaded look? So that's going to influence your musical choices. Pacing, is it like a slow puzzle game? Is it a fast-paced shooter? Is it some kind of tactical turn-based thing, so it's somewhere in the middle? And obviously the theme and story. What's going on in the game? Is it a desperate struggle for survival, or is it a friendly family game? Yeah, so that's all these 4 elements should influence your soundtrack, and you need to know them, so it's good to ask questions. Some of these things might be clear, such as the aesthetic. You can usually work that out just by looking at the screenshots, but other things you may need clarification. And don't be afraid to ask questions, especially early on. You might want to do just kind of a brainstorming session and say, okay, well, what is the setting? What pacing am I expecting here? What do you want the players to feel? That kind of thing. It's good to meet with the developer early on and answer these questions. The more information you have about the game, the better equipped you are. And so, once you have this information, you want to start writing a sketch to try to assimilate all these elements together and create a piece of music and see what they think. And it's probably a good idea to send a sketch away as soon as you have one ready. It'll be about a minute of music, a minute and a half. MP3 format, obviously, because it's small and easy to share, and work it up to a good standard. But shouldn't be like a final polished piece with everything perfectly mixed and mastered. Get it to a good standard so it sounds good, and you don't want to send them like an unfinished piece with just some randomly scratchily recorded guitars or something in there. You want to send them something that sounds a bit final but maybe isn't totally polished. And if once you're happy with it, send it through and see what they say. Now, keywords are a good way to find out what the core aspects of the game are. And this is a really good way to boil the essence of a game down to a concept or a single word or two. Try to work out 2 or 3 words that describe the game, and you definitely want to discuss this with the game developer. So ask them something like, how would you describe the feeling of the game in a few words? Or what am I supposed to be feeling when I'm playing this section? You want some very clear, a clear sentence or a clear couple of words. So as composers, we're responsible for communicating the feeling and emotion. We're also partially responsible for setting the pace, such as, is it a boss fight or is it relaxed? Even the most beautiful looking scene could be completely changed if you put some very unnerving music behind it. So we're really responsible for setting the pace and the emotion that a player will feel. And so if we don't know what these core words are, or don't have the correct core words or keywords, we could end up writing the wrong kind of thing, which is not what we want. And it'll waste everyone's time if you start diving in without really knowing what the game is about or the core kind of elements of the game. So here's a couple of keywords. For example, something like dark fairy tale. Immediately that's going to give you some good information on how you're going to write your score. Or something like a creepy cute or cute horror. So it has horror elements, but it's presented maybe in a creepy way. In a cute way. So, for example, like an 8-bit looking game that is horror, but it's kind of has some comedy or fun in there. Bright and calm, for example, a fast action racing, cyberpunk dystopia, military stealth. All these keywords will kind of get you started, and you'll be able to start looking into options and how to, what kind of instruments you're going to choose, what kind of research you can conduct to create a more accurate and effective score for these kind of games. And it's good to do this early on as well. You definitely want to try to work something out as soon as possible, what the keywords for the game might be. So, game developers. Each game developer is unique. They're just people like anyone else. When you're selling something to people, and in our case we're selling our music, so it's a good idea to develop customer profiles. So, what kind of customers are we selling to, and what are their personalities, and how do they react to things? So I've kind of created 3 rough customer profiles or customer personas, which will, obviously not everyone fits into these, it's kind of a shade, but this is a rough kind of look at 3 different types of personality you might end up dealing with as a composer for video games. The first one is, and these names are just invented names. These are just placeholder names that it could be anyone, you know, for example. So Matt, for example, doesn't really do music, and he's pretty happy to let you do whatever you like. And this is a great situation to be in as a composer. He'll generally say, "Yeah, this sounds great." No matter what you send, he'll say, "Oh, this sounds amazing. This sounds awesome. You're doing great." He doesn't give you a lot of feedback, and while this is good for us, it means we can be very free and create whatever we want. We have a lot of creative freedom in this kind of with this kind of customer. It also means we need to be a bit more proactive in the self-evaluation of our work. We need to be careful and go back and look at things, analyze our work, make sure we're creating something really high quality. Instead of just, if you send him a track and he says, "Oh, it sounds great," you know, you're not actually finished. You should go back to that track and polish it and make it as good as you can, even if he says it's great. The second type of developer is Josh, and he kind of knows what he wants, but he may not be great at communicating it. This kind of developer almost always asks for alterations, especially at the start of the project. So you'll send a piece and they'll say, "Oh, this is okay, but I think you should try this or try that." They'll give a lot of detailed feedback. They may even be musical or play an instrument or know have some musical knowledge. But this kind of developer will require a lot more initial work to arrive at a style that gels with the project. So you'll need to do quite a few drafts and sketches, keep working with the feedback, and eventually you'll get to something that's going to work really well with the game. So it takes a bit more work earlier on, but once you get to you've found your style for the game, it's going to start flowing a lot more smoothly. And then finally we have Amanda, who knows what she wants and how to get it. This is someone who probably has a bit of experience in the game industry. They know how to make artists and composers work effectively with the ideas that they want in the game. They know how to describe the game to people very accurately so they can get the good results. They may have a more musical background and be familiar with descriptive musical terms, but not necessarily. It may be they're completely unmusical, but they know how to describe their game very accurately. These people are good at providing keywords and things like mood sheets, which is kind of a picture which has lots of different inspiring images on it, and they're very, very useful because you can immediately see, oh, okay, they're going for this kind of tone, or they're going for this kind of story. And so working with this kind of developer is ideal. Personally, I don't think I've ever worked with anyone like this, maybe once or twice. So it's probably rare to get someone who's very, very experienced, depending on whether you're working with kind of indies or a larger studio. Probably a larger studio would be much better at this, but I'm sure there's also instances of larger studios not being great at communication as well. So regardless of the customer persona, it's important for us to try and do our best and try to work out how to get the best musical product for their game. Okay, working with Matt. You're going to have great creative freedom. You can do whatever you like, and he's going to say, "This is awesome." You will need to self-motivate, so you'll need to push yourself to work to create great music. You'll need to be more proactive in researching, examining your material and suitability. Like, you might write a track, and he'll say, "This is great," but if you actually examine it and look closely at it, maybe it's not actually that suitable for the game. Maybe it doesn't fit at all. And working with this kind of developer, you kind of want to play the game a bit with your music and see how it's going, you know? Get a demo from him, put it on, put your music on in the background, and see how it feels. Try to be very honest with yourself and how it feels. And you need to be more proactive in creating that high quality product. So you need to really check your work and go back and polish things, you know. It's easy to get lazy when everything you do is amazing. And you'll need to really push yourself to make that incredible soundtrack. And every soundtrack we do should be ideally incredible. It should really be our best work, because that's the way you're going to get more jobs if you keep creating great music. Okay, working with Josh. You need to find some of these key terms that we talked about before, and these will help you find the right direction. Do lots of sketches early on, and don't stop until you hear something like, "Oh, that's perfect, that's exactly what I was imagining." So keep sketching, keep doing tracks and trying different things until you hear that, "Oh, that's perfect," or something like that, or "That's exactly what I imagined." Those are the key words you want to listen for when you're getting feedback. And you may not know this at the start, but you may have to do lots of rewrites and edits. I remember I was once doing a film score in a jazz style, and I hadn't really done jazz before. And I ended up doing 13 or 14 different sketches before we got to something really that was correct. So sometimes you do have to, especially if it's a new style for you as well, sometimes you do have to do lots of sketches to try to get to the right point. Okay, working with Amanda. This is generally pretty easy for us. We're usually supplied with lots of good inspiration. They set the mood, desired played emotions, and it's all clearly defined, and they're usually very, very good at giving effective feedback. So this is like a best case scenario, and everything should flow pretty smoothly. You'll immediately know what the game is about, what kind of music you're going to need to write, and it's just up to you to really do your best. Okay, dealing with feedback. This is very important, because in the end, it's their project and they need to be happy. So we need to keep that in mind. It's not about us. Definitely we're important, and we should be writing music that we feel good about and that we're excited to write. But in the end, it's the game developer's project, and they want music that's going to suit their game and mesh really well with it. And really, you should be working this out when you're choosing a project or accepting a project. If you get approached with a project that you don't think you're going to enjoy, you probably shouldn't accept it. It may work out. You may end up changing your style to suit it, but generally, if you see a project and you think, "Oh, I don't know if that's going to work," or "That looks totally different to what I'm usually into," it may not be such a good idea to accept it. Anyway, that's a good thing to think about when you're looking at a project and thinking about accepting it. So the rule number 1 for feedback is always be polite and positive. Your music isn't being attacked, but instead the suitability is being examined. So don't worry too much. Like, you can't be too precious about this kind of stuff. All they're doing is saying, "Oh, is this music going to fit my game?" It's not a question of, are you a good or bad composer? So you need to keep that in mind when they're telling you, "Hey, this doesn't work," or "I don't really like this." They're not attacking you. They're just examining the suitability. And your job in the end is to make the game designer happy. It's their project, and they're going to have strong feelings about what is suitable. You can certainly suggest things, but in the end, it's going to be their call. And if this doesn't sound good to you, then unfortunately, this is the game industry, and this is also the film industry. And I think the only time we actually get to purely write your own music would be if you're given a commission as a classical composer. And generally, in a commission, they're going to at least specify the instruments you have to write for. And that's, if you're a classical composer, that's fine. You can do that all day, every day. You can write whatever you like. But could take you many, many years to get to that point as a classical composer, to the point where you get enough commissions to survive. And I think probably maybe 70 or 80% of people who want to be a composer may never make it to that stage. So it's quite difficult. In the film and game industry, we're working for someone else. We're providing music for a project. And some composers did get kind of uppity with their directors, such as Bernard Herrmann. He'd be very, very strong about what he thought, his opinion. But it's only because Hitchcock respected him and valued his opinion that he allowed him to change things sometimes. So, for example, I think the shower scene in Psycho was originally planned to have no music at all, but Herrmann absolutely insisted that there should be this wait, and it became one of the most iconic scenes in film. So, but remember, by that point, Herrmann was very, very well respected. If we're just a small composer working on an indie game, we can't go in and say, "We need this special thing," and just refuse to accept the game developer's view. We need to be easy to work with, ideally. Herrmann was, I think, notoriously quite a prickly character to work with. Okay, ideally, the developer has selected you because of your style. So you shouldn't need to write completely outside your comfort zone, although this can happen. And ideally, this goes both ways. You've selected the project because you like the style, and the game dev has selected you because they like your style. So your styles should be kind of compatible. And if you're difficult to work with, people won't want to work with you again. So it's not just about making great music. It's about having an enjoyable experience with the game developer and the rest of the team. You want to add value to their game. And that's we're adding value by creating great music and also just being a nice person and and helping them out if they need help. If they're feeling down, help them out. Look after them, and be kind to people. And I think if you're kind and add value and do your best work, you're going to have a good career in this industry. You just keep building up on your relationships. And if people enjoy working with you, they'll suggest you to other people as well. Okay, here's a case study in feedback. This is a game called Blackheart, which is in development here in Dunedin, in New Zealand. And I was brought in as the composer. And they gave me a bunch of information to start with. I kind of knew it was a fantasy game. It kind of had they thought maybe it would be kind of a dark setting. And I had this kind of anime-esque kind of looking, slightly gritty looking artwork. These very anime eyes and this kind of look. So this is what I was presented with to start with. Excuse me. And so with this, I believe I started to write a title track. Now, I talked to the developer for a while, and we tried to work out what kind of music he'd be interested in. And he shared some Dark Souls music and other music with a very haunting solo voice in it. And so usually the first thing I try to do when I start a project is to create a title track. This will be like the music you hear when you open up the menu. And so a title or menu music should really sum up the essence of the game. And so it's really important that once you can encapsulate the essence of the game correctly, then I feel you can go on and create the gameplay tracks. Now this could kind of go either way. You could either start with the essence of a game in this title track, or you could try to do different gameplay tracks and other things, and then write your title track at the end. It could work either way. Personally, I like to start with the title track, but I know in things like opera, usually they'd write the opening overture very last thing. And the overture is a similar thing. It sums up the essence of the opera. That first 2 or 3 minutes of the opera is called the overture, and it's like the introduction almost. And I know that classical composers would usually write that last, after they've written the entire opera. So it could work either way, I think. But personally, I like to go for the title track first. It gives me a reference of what kind of sounds and feelings I'm going to be using for the rest of the game. So I came up with this track using kind of a heartbeat kind of bass drum motive. And I spent about almost 3 hours on this, so let's have a listen. Usually I just put a small selection of the music in these slides, but clearly that's a longer track. And so you can see it's quite dark and a bit ominous. And so this was the feedback on this first sketch. Holy moly, I got goosebumps. Man, it's spooky. I love it. So that's pretty good to start with. But problem is the next sentence. I feel like this is probably a little too spooky to be the main menu music. But it would be incredible for a scene in the game where some shit's about to go down. And so while this first part is saying good things, yeah, I got goosebumps, that's good. It's spooky, that's good, I love it, yeah, that's good. We didn't hear the phrase, it's perfect. or this is exactly what I'm looking for. Remember, those are the phrases you're trying to get on your initial sketches. And especially this, I feel this is probably a little too spooky. That's negative. That means it's not correct. They're trying to be nice and not hurt your feelings, but this means, hey, you haven't actually done the right thing I'm looking for. Okay, essentially this track was not quite right for the main menu music. The key issue was too spooky. The music he'd linked from the Dark Souls was probably a little bit too moody. So here you can see my response. He just posted that stuff, and now your response as a composer is quite important. You can't just say, "Oh well, whatever. You don't like it. It was good." So blah blah blah. You have to actually try and maintain positivity, be positive, and work with them. So here's my response. I said, "I'm nice. Glad this kind of thing would fit in somewhere." He did say it could fit in, so that's good. I'm not being attacked. He's not attacking me. It's everything, trying to keep everything light and positive. And then he said, yeah, we'd probably only have 1 or 2 tracks that are this intense. It's not a horror game, but at the right moment, it could use an oh shit feeling. So this is important information. And during this game, I didn't actually have any keywords to start with. All I had was this artwork and the idea that the name Blackheart. So I didn't actually have any keywords, and I learned after this project to make sure I had keywords, so that was really important. And so I said, okay, cool, I'll look at a bit of a lighter direction. I also want to try writing some more catchy themes, such as the Final Fantasy VI theme, for example. I think that's a great idea. I know the stuff I linked was pretty moody, so he had linked all this Dark Souls music that was pretty intense, so I was kind of just going on what he had showed me. So it was time, after this, it's time to rewrite from scratch. So I had to start again, which is fine, it does happen. So now I know it's not a horror game, and the music I wrote was too spooky, so I need to kind of lighten it up a bit. So I started again from scratch. The first track was only a sketch, so that's not an issue. I can use it in somewhere else in the game perhaps, or use it in an asset pack or such like. I almost never expect a track to be perfect in the first draft. It would be very unlikely. Okay, now second attempt. So I tried to make it a little less spooky, kind of a little bit bittersweet, and just use solo piano because I wanted to write a really clear theme. I also did an orchestrated version too, and by this time I'd spent about 2 hours on the track. I need to delete this section up here, the time spent on, whoops. So here's the orchestrated version. And so obviously my orchestrated version, it was just a very quick, rough and quick sketch, so it's not massively orchestrated, it just added some strings and some pizzicato strings. So I spent about 2 hours on this track by this time. So here's the feedback from the second sketch. Wow, sounds amazing. I wonder if it's a little too cheerful for the main theme, though. It gives me total Hollow Knight vibes, which is a good thing, but I think it would suit a weird, wonderful part of the game rather than the core theme. So once again, we haven't quite hit the right mark. He says this time it's a little too cheerful. And remember, my response has to be, positive and neutral. I'm attempting to get to the goal, the goal of providing really good music that'll suit his game. So here's my response. All right, cool. I can look at something less cheerful. Smiley face. So yeah, just try to be, try to take on their feedback and just keep changing until it seems to suit. And try to really look carefully at what they're saying, you know? Pull out keywords like a little too cheerful. Last time it was too spooky, now it's a little too cheerful. So as it says here, I've gone from too spooky to too cheerful. So clearly I needed to find a middle ground. And this is the classic Goldilocks, too hot, too cold, and then once you know those extremes, you can kind of find somewhere in the middle. Okay, third and fourth sketches. So the third sketch, I was just tinkering around, aiming for something a bit bittersweet, neither sad nor happy. I didn't actually send this one to the developer, I was just testing out ideas. So sometimes you have to just find some ideas and just fool around on your own without actually sending anything on. So you can see I'm just using piano and trying to find something a little bit in between sad and happy. And this is the fourth sketch here. I spent about 2 hours on this. And this is where I'm starting to get to somewhere I'm a bit more happy with, in this kind of neutral, bittersweet sound. And so that's the one I sent to the developer. And here's the feedback. Wow, dude, that sounds incredible. Totally leaning into the darker tone without going overboard. I immediately feel like I'm in a dark fairy tale, which is perfect. And so perfect, this is the word we want to hear. And obviously I said, awesome, glad this kind of thing might work. And even then, I'm still trying to be humble, and you know, I never say that, oh, what I created was perfect. You know, that's just not true. Only time will tell if something's perfect. Only the fans will be able to say if something's perfect. You know, 10 years down the track, they'll say, wow, that title track was perfect. But right now, all I can say is, I'm glad this kind of thing might work. I created something, hopefully it's going to work. I'll try to do my best. So obviously this is great, this is what we want to hear. We've hit the tone we're looking for. Essentially this track is now correct. The next step is to extend, fill out, and polish. And the final track, while I kept that same theme, it's had a lot of polishing, a lot of things changed, different choirs, adding all sorts of interesting sounds and textures in the background, used better string samples, you know, I polished everything out of it. We've also now have a keyword, dark fairy tale. So if I'd known this keyword to start with, it may have saved some time. It may have saved a lot of time. And I think this dark fairy tale was come from the kind of the use of harp and piano. You know, the harp is the accompaniment, and the piano in octaves is on top. So I think that's how the dark fairy tale was kind of created in this instance. And yeah, so that's kind of a good example of working with feedback, and you know, try different things, get feedback early on. Like this is the first track I wrote for the project, and this is probably over the period of about a month this occurred. Obviously I'm not doing it full time, so I couldn't work on music every day, but if I was working on it every day, maybe this would be more over a week or 2 weeks. Yeah, and so it's a good example showing how you can try different things and eventually get to something that the game developer is very, very happy with. Yeah, and so that's it for this session. Next session we're going to look at the game music business, so things like how to get into the industry, how to deal with contracts, intellectual property, pricing, how much you should charge, how to do invoices. And it's not all, it's a fun lecture, so we're doing lots of interesting things, looking at how to get into game jams, how to use put your music into asset packs and make money from that. You know, it's good stuff. It's not just boring contracts. I'm not going to I barely spend any time looking at contracts, so yeah. I hope to see you next time, and yeah, I hope that's been helpful, and yeah, take it easy everyone, bye.